Mike Grunwald wrote the seminal book on Obama stimulus. Seminal sounds dirty, but it isn't. It was called The New Deal, the hidden story of change in the Obama era. And it told the story of this incredible amount of government intervention in the economy where we spent $800 billion to try to prevent a great depression. Since then, we this was in 2009. We slowly recovered from the Great Recession, came into the Trump era, and suddenly a pandemic. And Congress has now, since then, approved about $6 trillion.
It is amazing. Wow.
Just with quicker than it approved the $14 billion that we ultimately approved to fight Ebola. And it's just doing it quick, just rolling money out, and we're talking about another $2.5 trillion that could be used to invest. This would be the first investment in infrastructure, a substantial investment in infrastructure since the Obama stimulus. And we wanted to talk to someone who knows more about that than anyone in the world, and that's Mike Grunwald. He's a senior writer at Politico. He also wrote a book called The Swamp about the Everglades, Florida and the Politics of Paradise, that is kind of an essential read if you want to understand why Florida's environmental politics are so screwy. But his insight into why the stimulus was so important, I think, gives us a great idea of how this infrastructure bill, which could end up being 3 times the size almost of the Obama stimulus, could be the most important thing government has done since the real first New Deal.
I'm Chris Savage. I'm here with a mysterious LOL GOP, and this is the GOT MFB Show.
Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Since we couldn't get Joe Manchin on the podcast, we'll skip the politics of whether this all can pass for now and just assume it's all up to him, and focus mostly on the big strokes of the policy of the American Jobs Infrastructure proposal. First of all, do you have a kind of a general reaction to the proposal, the good, the bad, and the Amtrak of it?
Right. Who cares, right? I'm not going to mention.
Right.
It matters what
he's not taking our call, so we got to call.
What he thinks.
Yeah.
Look, I think it's big. I think it's pretty bold. I think there's a lot of cool stuff in it. I did even Amtrak, the stuff that the administration itself has said seems perfectly logical. Amtrak, I assume you're referring to, put out a map that I made a lot of fun of in Politico because it made no sense, and it's basically about building a lot of trains to nowhere.
Yes.
That's what Amtrak does. And it's not clear that Amtrak Joe had anything to do with it or is going to go along with it. So, I think this is pretty much, it's a serious proposal to invest in infrastructure. I think some people have correctly noted that there are parts of it that aren't really infrastructure, but some of those parts aren't necessarily bad at all.
Agreed.
It's about investing in competitiveness, fixing some of the stuff that's broke, and also trying to move towards a greener, clean energy economy and in ways that our climate really demands.
So we wanted to dig in a little bit actually on that. There is stuff in there that is arguably not infrastructure, but the stuff that it relates to climate change certainly should be called that, in my opinion anyway. How do you feel about what's in there, and does it meet the urgency of the moment in terms of the climate crisis?
Well, I think nothing will ever meet the urgency.
Yeah,
of the
probably
moment,
not.
Right? I mean,
Right.
It's a pretty urgent moment, and what do we need to do? We need to stop using fossil fuels now, and we need to completely transform our use of land so that we stop expanding our agricultural footprint and end deforestation. But that's not going to happen. So in the realm of the possible, this really makes a lot of strides in the kind of directions that you want to go. There are big subsidies for deploying and sort of creating some certainty around deployment for wind and solar and storage, the kind of stuff that we know we're going to need, the kind of stuff that's already good, thanks in part to the stimulus we did in 2009. And it's really important to just get as much of that out there as possible so we can shut down coal plants as quickly as possible and move towards the zero emissions electric grid that President Biden has targeted for 2035, which is really aggressive, but is not preposterous, because coal has become so uneconomical. This will really help. The next big step, obviously, after we do electricity, is going to be transportation, and there are huge subsidies for electric vehicles. Actually, some of those I'm not sure that giving people subsidies and incentives to buy electric vehicles, is that really infrastructure? I don't know, but I know we really need it.
Right, exactly.
So I think that's pretty exciting. And there's just a lot of, on most of this stuff, it's kind of the more the better. Fossil fuels bad, zero emissions energy good. And this is definitely trying to put the thumb on the scale to promote zero emissions energy at the expense of fossil fuels.
Yeah, right. Is it fair to say that it will do for electric cars what the Obama stimulus did for solar energy?
I think it's very different. But the Obama stimulus really got electric cars going. Remember, in 2009, we had zero. I mean, there were maybe like a handful of Tesla Roadsters.
Right.
Tesla was on the verge of bankruptcy before they got their federal loan.
He would have gone the way of the Lady of the Dale if it hadn't been for the stimulus. I think people don't remember.
Yeah, no, and so the stimulus did create these battery factories that you guys know very well in Michigan, and people made a lot of fun of them at the time because there were like workers sitting around on the factory floor with nothing to do because there were no electric vehicles at the time.
Right. Yeah. No, sorry.
And so there wasn't a lot of demand for electric vehicle batteries. But now I have a Chevy Bolt sitting there in my driveway, and it's got a battery that was made in Michigan. Exactly. So I think that got it going, but. Honestly, Obama's his goal was 1 million electric cars on the road in 5 years, and it took 10. We now have 1 million electric cars on the road, but it was slower than they had hoped. I think the idea now is to just try to pick it up. There's this, they haven't said exactly how they're going to dole out the subsidies, but there's clearly a need to encourage people to buy electric vehicles and to bring down the cost of electric vehicles. And I think some of the stuff they're talking about in terms of, federal procurement will help bring down the cost by creating this built-in demand. And the idea is to try to create a virtuous cycle where, the batteries get cheaper, the cars get cheaper, people see that their neighbors have them, they buy more, and that makes it easier to put up the infrastructure, the charging, either at people's houses or on the highways. And you just start moving towards a more electrified economy, which, assuming we keep moving towards greener electricity, that's right. The number one way to reduce our emissions.
Well, as a Tesla owner, I support all of that.
Oh, congrats.
It's an affordable car now. I mean, compared to, it wasn't much more than my wife's.
And I think the important thing about Tesla, and I think it's true of the Bolt too, is that people love it. Right. It would have been very difficult to sell you should buy this green car because it's green. People spend a lot of time in their car, but you've seen how
literally the coolest thing I've ever owned.
The car reviewers, when they when they write about Tesla, it's like teenage boys reviewing porn.
100%.
Good car. So that's the way. And I think ultimately, to change the topic a little bit, but I think this is, the fake meat people have the same idea. They're not going to tell people to eat fake meat to save the world because meat is delicious. But if you can make fake meat a lot like meat, well, sure, then people will get it.
Eat it because it's good.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Mike, you're kind of the human time capsule of the Obama stimulus, since everyone else in the press seems to want to forget that it ever happened. It didn't. It was kind of like there was a moment to talk about the stimulus. Once we started spending $4 trillion, it didn't really ever happen except for from you. But since the pandemic has kind of just exploded what the Congress has decided we can spend in time of emergency, do you think back? differently about the original stimulus, and then how do you think Joe Biden's role? He was the guy who was kind of like the enforcer of the stimulus. Helped him. Did you think that that's helped him avoid some of the mistakes of 2009 and rethink the way he's approaching his entire presidency?
Oh, those are great questions. And so first of all, yeah, I mean, look, I wrote a book arguing that the Obama stimulus was a really big deal. Like $800 billion was a lot of money.
Yeah.
It seemed like it at the time.
Yeah.
And $90 billion for clean energy was insane. We were spending like $2 or $3 billion a year. Now, of course, that's like chump change.
That's like a PPP extension that they
Right.
throw in the middle of the night now.
Exactly.
Right, exactly. Or it's like Clinton had proposed a stimulus that I think was $18 billion, and it got voted down because people thought it was wasteful spending,
ludicrous, right? Exactly.
Money. I guess now that's how we think of the $800 billion stimulus. It's just like a rounding error.
Wow.
But look, I think. First of all, we've already spent $6 trillion between the various Trump COVID relief bills and then the first Biden one, but those were really relief bills. Those were just getting money into the economy and trying to, or at least belatedly trying to actually do something about the virus.
Right.
And so those were sort of classic Keynesian stimulus in terms there was a gigantic hole in demand and the CARES Act, and then later, the American Rescue Act. It did a lot to fill that hole, and I think you're going to see a lot of growth. It's put a lot of money in people's pockets. It's done what Keynesian stimulus is supposed to do. It's get people spending so that businesses stop laying people off and people stop saving all their money to because the rainy day is here. And I just think that's great. Until now, there hasn't really been kind of investments. Remember the Obama stimulus was called the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And that had a lot of both, but like about, probably $150 billion of it was really sort of long-term thinking. Now we're looking at, about $2.5 trillion of long-term thinking. So it's exciting. I think a lot of it follows the pattern of the Obama stimulus, which, in infrastructure, there was a real emphasis on fixing it first rather than building new sprawl roads. And I think Biden is following that as well. And again, the Obama stimulus was very green. The Biden stimulus is going to be greener.
You wrote basically that Republicans can't support this bill because it's designed to help cities, which are sort of the maternity wards for Democrats. It also validates the role of government in our lives, which, the pandemic certainly did, but this is going to do it even more so. Do you think that's ultimately why Republicans have never really tried to pass an infrastructure bill? Is there any kind of infrastructure bill they would support, except maybe buying everybody an AR-15?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. AR-15s are infrastructure. Yes. Everything is infrastructure now.
Nice.
I dug deep into the Trump approach to infrastructure. I did this sort of giant magazine story about the Gateway Tunnel, which is the most important infrastructure project in the country. It's to fix these tunnels under the Hudson River that are, in danger of.
Would have made Trump the greatest hero in the history of New York
Exactly.
State. Yeah.
You could have named it after Trump.
Yeah.
I hope all of your listeners go and read my 6,000 word piece about infrastructure and tunnels, and there are a lot of fun stories, and so I hope they'll enjoy it. But honestly,
make a great movie, by the way. Actually,
but honestly, I could have done it in a tweet. It was basically that, the Trump approach to infrastructure is bullshit. They weren't really serious about it. Trump would have liked, he's a builder. He likes to build. But McConnell didn't really want to do anything, and so he didn't really care. And he cared more about sort of owning the libs and owning Chuck Schumer and not giving something to Cory Booker and Gillibrand, who he thought were going to run against him, than actually doing something. Yeah. And I do think there is a problem. Like he had some of these kind of heritage types working in his administration who generally think government is bad and we should drown it in a bathtub and all that. And then there are a lot of Republicans who think of infrastructure. When they think of infrastructure, they think, aside from whatever's in my district, they think that means highways. It's not a coincidence that the transportation bill in Congress is known as the highway bill. Right. And they call it the highway bill. And it's mostly about building sprawl roads. And I guess I'm sure, there would have been Republican support for that because, that's roads to their voters. It's roads to, create development out in, the boonies that create sprawl and, the kind of exurban communities that also tend to vote Republican. Mm-hmm. They like that stuff, but they don't really like transit. They don't really like, fixing urban water pipes. Right. They don't really like stuff that makes cities and metropolitan areas vibrant, because those are the places that rural children are moving because there aren't any jobs in rural America. Right. And they're going to places where people live close together and becoming Democrats. So I think it's going to be a tough sell to get Republicans to support any kind of infrastructure bill.
It's crass, but true.
Yeah. Well, one place where there doesn't seem to be new Democrats is Florida, which seems to be symbolic in a lot of ways of Democratic ineffectiveness. Obama won the state twice, but Democrats haven't elected a governor there this century, or won it since 2012. There may be no state that's paying more costs of climate change, or will eventually. And there's things like the Piney Point environmental disaster. And then the state has refused to expand Medicaid and turned down probably $20 billion so far in just money that's just burnt up that could have been spent on giving people health care. But
rub
Republicans...
Jason, rub it in.
But I mean, hey, Republicans have paid no price for any of this. Is that just because of all the old white people moving there to retire, or is it just the Democrats in the state are that bad at winning elections?
Well, look, I may sound a little bit, cockeyed optimist on some of this stuff, but in fairness, until Trump won Florida by a few percentage points this year. Yeah, he did really, he really beat expectations. Biden did badly, particularly with Hispanic voters. So I think when Trump won by, was it 2 points, 3 points?
Right.
Until that, basically every statewide election over the last 20 years in Florida has been within 1 percentage point.
Right.
And Democrats have lost just about all of them.
Right.
So there is something feckless about it. I mean, they had an unlosable, election for the governor's race in 2018, and they put up Andrew Gillum, who ran a kind of, far left, racialized campaign in a state where you couldn't be dumber to do something like that. And he narrowly gave it away. So I don't think.
And Bill Nelson lost by probably the slimmest margin of senators lost.
Yeah, exactly. And that was only because Bill Nelson sucks.
That's the NASA administrator you're speaking of.
Right. Okay. In trouble for that one. Yeah. He was a horrible candidate.
Yeah.
He was certainly I would say, undistinguished senator known for nothing.
So, House of Cards kind of extra, kind of a guy that would be walking in the room for House of Cards. That's what I kind of think of him. He looks like a politician.
Right. And also, Rick Scott threw this $100 wall of money at him too. So look, I don't want to defend Florida Democrats. They put a friend of mine now is the new head of the Democratic Party, Manny Diaz, who was a very effective mayor of Miami, Cuban, who certainly understands politics. He's been very focused on raising money. He seems to have been turning around their financial woes, which I guess maybe is a prerequisite. But the main problem Democrats have in Florida is registration and turnout. They've just done a horrible job. And I guess maybe money is a prerequisite to that. But look, Rick Scott won Puerto Ricans or came very close, which is
after Maria,
which is just insane. The Democrats have just done a terrible job here of making the case that they have anything to offer young voters, Hispanic voters. Hillary did well with Black voters and Hispanics. She actually brought them out, but she did terrible with suburban swing voters. So it's just been, it really is still a swing state. But there are rumblings that even the Biden people think that it's it's not one of their top priorities.
And I just get like Marco Rubio, at one point kind of seemed like it's going to jab Mike a little bit here, but the Republican savior. But he doesn't seem like an undefeatable candidate, and they can't even get a Democrat to really even step up to run against him. It freaks me out.
I would like on my tombstone for it to say that I did not write that headline.
I know. I'm sorry.
And the story holds up.
Yes, absolutely.
But look, Rubio's a tough candidate. Look, he's like, when you take classic Republican, basic Republican, there are no Republicans in Florida who have something against Marco Rubio. And then you add that he does extremely well with South Florida Hispanics. Right. He's a smart politician. He's tough to beat. But yeah, I mean, Florida's had the Democrats have just, at some point you can't just, you can't ignore the fact that they lose every election.
Right.
They're very close.
Yeah.
But, when you lose a really close election, you get to go home and the other guy gets to go get the job.
And maybe why they invested so much in Arizona and Georgia. So
right, exactly.
Yeah, no. So it's, look, the people do maybe they've stopped now, but for years people have overstated Democrats, their kind of demographic advantage in Florida, because it is true the state gets a little bit browner every year, and that presumably ought to help Democrats. But the basic dynamic is every year there are a fair amount more Hispanic voters who end up not going as much for Democrats as you'd expect and don't vote as much as Democrats would want. And at the same time, you get a ton of older white voters who come to places like the Villages and Cape Coral that are the fastest growing metropolitan areas in America. And they vote Republican. And that has been the story.
Switching back to climate change for a sec, you've written about how we need to take both micro and macro changes in order to fight it. For example, we need to eat less red meat as individuals, but we also need to force governments to reduce CO2 emissions both on the national and international level. What are the micro and personal changes that you think would do the most good? What could we as individuals, if we all took this action, it would be the most impactful?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I do bang my spoon in my high chair about this because I think there is a trend in enviropolitics. I think because they got so tired of being seen as nudges and scolds, and like, oh, you got to recycle, don't use plastic straws, all that stuff. That there's been this shift to your individual actions don't matter. All that matters is elect good people and pressure them to
right.
pass a clean energy standard.
Right.
But I do think that's bullshit.
I do too.
And we see it during COVID, right? Where we stopped driving and suddenly there was no smog in LA.
Exactly.
Right? Like emissions are us. That's the thing. And there's no question that like policy has a huge amount to do with like what kind of cars we drive and, whether we put solar on our roofs and, and whether there are good alternatives to meat that, that can help reduce emissions. But ultimately, Exxon doesn't, force you to drive an SUV.
Yep, exactly.
And Trump didn't make us eat 3 burgers a week, which is actually the American average.
Right. Wow.
And so yeah, I think, if you wanted to do quickly, the big things are, if you can get an electric vehicle, if you can go solar, reduce the amount of red meat you eat in particular. It's beef and lamb are horrible for the environment. Chicken and pork aren't wonderful, but they're not nearly as bad. So shifting from beef to chicken makes a huge difference. Wasting less food is gigantic. We waste a third of our food, which means we waste a third of the land used to produce that food, a third of the fertilizers and pesticides used to produce that food, a third of the diesel used to run the tractors that produce that food. So I think that's a really big one. Our recycling programs are terrible, but if we recycle more paper, we'll need to cut down fewer trees, and that's helpful. So a lot of these things, some of them, eating local is not as important as cutting out one of those 3 burgers a week. That's for sure. But anything that people can do, it does make a difference. Like we know when you use fossil fuels, you're contributing just a little bit to a problem that does threaten the human race. It's good to contribute a little bit less.
You betcha. We've got such a plethora of great breweries around here that I can, feed my craft brew addiction with local stuff that doesn't have to be shipped from California, for example, or Colorado. So that's just like a tiny step that I take, but it's easy to take it because we have so many good beers here.
Drink local.
Right, drink local. Exactly. There you go.
But I don't want to be I don't want to be a buzzkill about it, but the local food stuff is a very tiny piece of the pie, and eating organic is probably making things worse.
Don't tell me that.
If you want to help with your diet, waste less food, eat less beef.
I grow my own food, a lot of it, so we'll go there.
Yeah, and Chris doesn't eat any red meat, so we're basically lecturing me here. So,
and I should say, like, I eat too much meat, so it's like, and you know why? Because it's delicious.
Yes.
But Impossible burgers are awesome. So now I'm trying to do more of those.
I don't like them because they taste too much like meat.
Right. Yeah. Well, you're better than us, Chris. But better. Yeah, better. What is the better brand? I tried the sausage the other day. I was like, oh, this is good. Beyond. Yes.
Beyond is good too. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Just Eggs, which are which are really good. They're the liquid eggs. They're made from mung beef.
Okay.
They're and they're growing like crazy, and they're displacing a lot of eggs. And so that's important. Dairy is actually worse than chicken or pork. It's not as bad as beef or lamb.
Yeah, I think this is the next wave of people. Kind of like everybody was so obsessed with Trump. We have kind of a little bit of bandwidth of what to do to kind of be occupied all the time. I do think people are going to start getting. I hope that people are going to start getting activated about this. But
now we can talk about like whether the post office has electric vehicles.
Right. Yeah.
Whether Amtrak should build a line to Rockland, Maine, or whatever. These are like, we don't.
It does amaze me how much your brain is freed up by him. That asshole not be on Twitter.
Totally. I was just thinking that same thing yesterday.
Exactly. Well, we don't have to think about
or him having power. I don't know if it's the combination. It was like the combination of him having power and Twitter. It was just too much. I think our brains couldn't really handle it. We were not evolved to deal with that. I don't think.
Right.
But looping back to kind of to finish where we started, and we let you go. Thank you so much, Mike. This has been a great conversation. I always appreciate talking to you about this. You know more about this than anyone in America, so it's great to be able to speak to you about this. But to talk about the politics a bit, which is ridiculous because it basically comes down to one dude who lives in he's the only Democrat who can win a statewide election in West Virginia. Is there? Do you think there's any way to get this done, or is this just basically about giving Joe Manchin a few things about that he killed in the bill that made our made smaller?
I mean, that certainly was what happened with the COVID relief bill.
Totally.
Like, I think he was an extremely constructive presence in the COVID relief bill. He, and in fact, in general, has been so far. I think he's probably he's provided cover for other Democrats who didn't really want to do a $15 minimum wage. Yeah. He probably provided cover for Democrats who didn't want to vote for Neera Tanden. He's like taking flack, and in the end, he's sort of helping Biden pass his agenda. If he does that also with the the infrastructure bill, if he says like, absolutely not, we will not do,
it's got to be 26%. It can't be 27%.
Exactly. The corporate tax will only be 25%, and the clean electricity standard, needs to include carbon capture. It's like, well, okay.
All right, yeah, give it to him. No kidding. Here's your sucker.
And that would be very, I do think this is going to be a harder one than the bill, but it seems doable, and people like spending money, and the Republican, I'm not, I've learned not to, some of the dumbest stuff I've ever written has been sort of premised on the idea that bad Republican ideas are going to be unpopular. And look, I don't know, maybe cancel culture is going to be the
Dr. Seuss is going to decide the 2022 election.
But I do think one lesson of 2009, just on substance, I mean, obviously Biden does not want to take political, he doesn't want to do what Obama did politically, because it was a complete disaster. There was a wipeout in 2010, and that really hamstrung his agenda pretty significantly. That said, like, the stuff that was horribly unpopular in 2009 and 2010, he got a lot of stuff done. He regulated Wall Street, and he, passed a massive healthcare reform, and he
led to the longest economic expansion in American history.
Launched a clean energy revolution.
Yeah.
So I think one of the lessons, and then he did get reelected. So
that's right.
And his vice president got elected, like, never. This has never happened in American history, that your vice president gets elected 4 years beyond you. I mean, it's kind of a step beyond Reagan.
Really
so
is.
I did think one of the look, I write for Politico. I've written a lot about politics. I've been a stupid pundit just like all of the rest of us, but I try to have a little bit of humility about my ability to prognosticate the politics, especially since, like, you can do stuff, and then maybe your election comes down to, like, a waiter with an iPhone takes a video of Mitt Romney saying something about the 47%, and then you get reelected. Then it's like, God, I'm glad that we didn't, not do stuff just, because of, to try to get the politics right. I think it's hard to know the politics. They're probably going to be bad in 2022, whether he does stuff or whether he doesn't do stuff. So he probably ought to do stuff.
Might as well do stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just this last, since I have you, Mike, if this passes, this would certainly be bigger than the stimulus. Would this kind of be the biggest thing that the government has done since the New Deal? Would be the new deal?
I mean, it would be really big. I mean, the government's doing a lot of big stuff lately. I mean, there have been quite a few trillion with a T.
They keep sending me checks. I know that never happened.
I know. But look, I don't think. Put it this way: I don't think the Republican argument in 2022 will be Joe Biden is a do-nothing president.
No, I don't either. No kidding.
If he gets this done after getting the relief bill done, that's going to be a lot of stuff. And I'm sure he's prepared, because he was alive in 2009. He's prepared that there will be stuff that goes bad. There'll be stuff that Republicans make fun of. And there'll be stupid stuff in there. You can't spend $2.5 trillion.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
Every dollar be efficient. I remember somebody in the Obama White House telling me, like, sometimes we give Pell Grants to drunks.
Right.
And it's like, you can't. It's not every dollar is going to be spent well.
But some drunks who get the Pell Grant end up graduating college,
going into the U.S. Senate.
Right.
But look, it's I think the idea, certainly, it's got to be better politics to, like, give people money and try to do stuff that make their lives better than not to do that.
Absolutely right.
It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to overcome the Dr. Seuss stuff and the Mr. Potato Head stuff and the
they got us in a corner. The broadband is an infrastructure. We're gonna have a year debate about whether broadband's infrastructure or not.
Who's using which bathroom? And again, I don't downplay it. Like, I think some of that stuff, which comes down to, particularly the, the cancel culture, woke culture stuff, comes down to like, somebody's coming after your status quo, and
yes.
that, as we've seen, has been like very powerful. They see you as a white guy with privilege. That's something Democrats are going to have to deal with. But that's aside, that's why you pay your political operatives to come up with stuff to deal with that. You pay with your policy guys to try to make the world better, and it seems like that's pretty much what Biden's trying to do.
I do think he's talking about it more, about his accomplishments right after they happen, instead of just saying, okay, that's done, let's move on to the next thing, which I feel like Obama did and didn't really get credit for a lot of the things that he does or did.
I think there's some truth to that. There's also some like mythology about that. It's like Obama talked.
There was a lot of signs. There were a ton of reinvestment signs all over America.
Like Obama talked about his stuff, and it's always the like. I think Obama's problem is that like he passed a jobs bill and then unemployment went to 10%.
Right.
And it wasn't his fault. If he hadn't passed a jobs bill, unemployment would have gone to 13% or 14%. But it's just, it's just kind of hard to message double-digit unemployment. People were pissed. He was the guy in the chair. Hopefully, this time, looks from Biden's perspective, it looks like we're about to have like double-digit growth. And he's going to be the guy in the chair. So maybe that'll be helpful.
Finally.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time. And hopefully we'll be able to come back and talk to you about climate change more. Once this current crisis is over, we'll deal with the next one.
Yeah, excellent. Stay safe, guys.
Thank you. Take care.
So I think that, we put a ton of weight into Joe Manchin and whether he's going to decide us or not. But I think that Manchin has kind of an idea that Joe Biden needs to accomplish two huge things, and then everything else Democrats want to do is terrible. So let's keep the filibuster. That's my ultimate kind of take on this whole thing. He's the one senator who would actually probably benefit from voter suppression. So I don't think he has any huge interest in passing a Voter Rights Act or HR 1. But I don't think this is where we ultimately have to, the Senate parliamentarian has made it clear that this can pass. They can do this and make sure that this happens, and then they can do another reconciliation bill after this. So Biden could accomplish something else in 2022. Biden would still be one of the most accomplished Democratic presidents ever, but there may not be enough people voting because Republicans are better at voter suppression than we could be at turning voters out. So that's kind of where I end up coming down on this. But it's hugely important that this happens. If we have any hope of fighting, doing anything to fight climate change, it's, as Mike said, not enough, but more than we would have ever done before. This infrastructure bill really needs to pass.
The fact that Republicans will not allow an infrastructure bill to go through if they can possibly help it because it helps Democrats in cities is just really shows the depth of their depravity or whatever, and how unpatriotic they are, how un-American they are, how this is all for power and personal, advancement. And
one thing I don't think it's pointed out enough is why they won in 2010. What did Republicans run on in 2010 to win this massive wave? They ran on Medicare cuts that were in Obamacare. This unnameable, no one could ever tell you what was actually cut out of Medicare because it was just a change of formulas and stuff like that. They just ran on a Democratic principle. They ran against
a black guy too, so there was that.
Right. And then they on a racially, we underestimated anyone who said the Tea Party was racialized. Like, how dare you?
Yeah, whatever.
And then 5 years later, they're nominating the birther.
Exactly.
The birther who exploded deficits. Like the Tea Party, all we care about is deficits. And no, actually, all you cared about was the birth certificate.
Exactly.
So we know that. So, and now all they care about is QAnon. Even now, as Matt Gaetz is dating half the high school softball team or whatever. But I also think that we have to briefly discuss this election and the Amazon election. We talked about it with Stephen Groundhouse before.
Bessemer,
It wasn't even close in Bessemer, Alabama, even though it did get people pumped up all over the nation about this whole idea of how important it is to organize these Amazon warehouses, but it was not even close.
No, and it's so depressing because this is a big win for the the corporatist wing of the world parties, and they're going to use this to.
And Bezos came out this week for the infrastructure bill, kind of, saying that I will raise my taxes, even though Amazon pays no taxes, and like this is progressive corporatism.
It's bad.
They said that. They said we're the most progressive company in America, is what they said.
I'm reading a book right now called "The Most Dangerous Man in Detroit." It was written back in like the late 70s, 80s. And it's sort of the definitive biography of Walter Reuther, the father of the modern labor union or movement. And, reading about the early days back in the 20s and 30s of, when they're just starting to form these unions in Detroit and other urban areas, and watching the struggles that they went through. And these were people who, literally got their asses beat by Ford thugs and the police were, completely.
And this is like physical. They hired people to beat them.
Really, literally, just beat their asses, put them in the hospital.
Not how we got our asses beat in Bessemer.
No, nothing like that. No, this is like, they owned the police departments and stuff, and yet they were not able to stop this in the end. And it makes me afraid that it's no longer, just the sort of brutal physical power that like Ford had, for example. It's going to be this sort of corporate ownership of everything that has to do with mobilizing people.
And Ford used a similar strategy. It was like, I'm going to pay you a somewhat living wage, and I'm going to be better for you than any business ever was. And like Amazon's like, we pay you $15. Well, $15 was not meant to be the ceiling.
Right. That was the basement. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, Ford would, and not just Ford, all of the motor companies would, you'd watch if your friends started to organize, you'd watch them get fired and lose their jobs. And,
which is exactly what happens in Walmart, what happens in Amazon, which happens, even in Google and even in Facebook, they've never been able to organize any of these big tech companies.
Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll have to see if the labor movement is up to the new corporatist efforts to squash collective bargaining, units, because it's, we are in a place now where this country was at the beginning of the 20th century, and
it's a gilded age. I mean, it
really is.
Basically, we're about to go into a roaring 20s, one way or other, and that we know which one way leads to a depression, the other way leads to, the 30s led to the birth of the middle class, the 20s led to the depression. We can choose one way or the other.
Yeah, that's right. All right. I didn't mean to bring us down, but we didn't. You're right. We needed.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, so. That's it. Maybe Jordan will cheer us up. So why don't we go to our weekly segment now with Jordan Zakarin and Progressives Everywhere.
They're everywhere. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. They're everywhere.
It's now time for Progressives Everywhere with the man who tracks them, Jordan Zakarin. Jordan, what's up this week, buddy?
We're gonna do some good news.
Good.
Oh, whoa!
All right.
Wait! I was trying to find Jordan Zakarin.
Yeah. Hello, is this thing on?
He's been kidnapped. And I'm reporting here from his New York apartment. No,
excellent.
It actually is based here in New York. We had some good. It's not not great news here in New York, politically speaking. It's been
yes, no time. Kidding.
But put that aside for a second, even though it's impossible to do so, and let's focus on the big budget. And every state budget matters, but New York is this crazy labyrinthian process that used to be just like three guys in the smoke-filled room. It determines so much of what happens in the state, and has just been dominated by powerful interests for a very long time. Mm-hmm. New York, though, last year, Democrats got a supermajority in both legislative houses, in the state Senate especially. And that means they had a lot more negotiating room with the ostensible Democratic governor to pass some very important things, get some very important things enacted. He also had, I would say, less leverage, I guess, this time around, Governor Cuomo, because he's a little worried about his future.
Got a little less.
But it isn't entirely. But there was a good article in the New York Times where it says it's, at least that was their take. It's not entirely about that.
Oh no! Yeah. So I spoke with State Senator Alessandra Biaggi, who has become, once she ran in 2018 against the IDC, the Independent Democratic Caucus that was the fake Democrats giving power to Republicans. She won there, and she's become like a leading voice very quickly in the progressive movement. Nice. And in the state Senate. She's been great. And we talked about how they got this budget passed. I want to run through some of the big items before we talk about it. Probably the biggest headliner was something called the Excluded Workers Fund. And as you guys know, there's a lot of undocumented workers in New York. A lot of undocumented people who've been
New
here.
York runs on undocumented workers,
probably so.
to be honest.
Yes.
Yeah, as much of the nation.
Yes, absolutely, and they've been here for years and years and years, and provide the backbone of the economy and everything else. And during COVID, they either lost their jobs or exposed to COVID and lost family members in such a prodigious, horrible rate. And unfortunately, if you're undocumented, you generally can't receive unemployment benefits or a lot of the other federal help that people got. And
while you do generally pay taxes,
right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They pay taxes and they do not get much for it. And so a big movement happened this past year and then into this year called Fund Excluded Workers. They had a coalition, I think 200 groups. I spoke with one of them today. 200 nonprofit and activist organizations. I didn't even know there was that many around.
But, no kidding.
Yeah. So they all came together and they all worked inside and outside. They shut down bridges. They all showed up on bridges, and they held a hunger strike for like 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the budget negotiations being finalized. And eventually they wound up with $2.1 billion in money for, as I call them, excluded workers, people who are undocumented, who lost their jobs, who are struggling to make ends meet, make do right now. And that is a historic victory.
That's impressive. I'm surprised this hasn't gotten more attention.
It's gotten a lot of attention here
on Fox News.
Yeah, right. For all the wrong reasons, exactly.
Yeah,
but it's remarkable, and to get that much money for them, and there's questions of how it's going to be distributed. It's going to be up to the Attorney General to figure that out, and there's going to be different tiers, as Senator Biaggi told me. So I need to kind of go through how exactly it's going to be distributed, but it's a huge victory. It's remarkable, and it comes along with big investments in rent relief, because you can get up to that now, a year of rent relief due to COVID if you can show hardship due to COVID.
That's great.
And there was we also legalized marijuana. That wasn't in the budget, but also.
But how are you going to pay for it? I guess is the question I would ask you, Jordan.
Well, turns out there's a lot of wealthy people in New York.
Oh, well,
I heard that. Yes.
And
I saw the show called The Apprentice once that alerted me to such.
There's a few wealthy people here, and they are having their taxes raised by a point or two. Could you imagine that?
Oh,
there goes the economy.
It sounds like the Holocaust all over again.
And the persecution of the rich here is terrible. I got to tell you, people are crying and screaming on Park Avenue down on Wall Street. It is, the race.
They're having their au pairs. They're protesting in their honor.
That's right.
It's remarkable, and obviously, Senator Biaggi said that Cuomo's difficulties, she couldn't lie and say, oh yeah, that didn't play into it, but it was Democrats took back a supermajority even before Cuomo. Well, while Cuomo was like a big political star still,
Right.
And groups like Make the Road Action and all these other organizations helped fund, and Working Families Party helped fund these members of the Assembly and the senator and new senators who really pushed, and they worked for them, and they got progressives in office. And so, like you said, it was Cuomo's trouble, but it wasn't just that,
Right.
And so that, along with some big voter rights expansions, is really big. That'll be coming in 2023, but still a big deal. This is probably the most progressive budget, certainly of my lifetime. If you look at, certainly, I would say I can't even tell you since when. And the fact that it was paid for in higher taxes, once those people do not, move to Florida and have their homes destroyed by hurricanes or whatever, what have you, I imagine that'll stick. The tax increases aren't in there forever, but once politicians survive, challenges,
right, exactly.
Based on that, there's no reason to cut down that. They won't be as afraid.
This is very gratifying to you, I would imagine, having Biaggi being this, successful this early after your support.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you help a candidate who you believe in and hope they're not going to make you look terrible. I got to say that my decision not to back Matt Gaetz when he ran for Congress,
You're right.
I feel really good about that.
I was wrong about that, Jordan. Matt Gaetz stan, and I regret it.
Jason's on the record here.
Yeah, two big points about this is, we always wonder why California is so liberal and New York doesn't, and a lot of the Republicans are like, you guys complain about Georgia laws. Well, look at New York laws. They're like, yeah, New York fucking sucks. And that's why it's been so, for so long, the actual electorate has not represented the state at all.
100%.
Yeah, and so yes, we should absolutely improve New York's voting laws, and New York will end up looking a lot like California. And that's the point: is they've been trying. There's been Democrats there who don't want it to look like California, and they're losing.
And the thing is also, California is so much larger, and the wealth and the liberals
geographically.
Yes, and
Totally.
they're spread out more. So much in New York, so many of like the
That's
Democrats,
what I meant by geographically.
Right? Yeah. They're like spread out more, and so many of the Democrats and there's progressivism elsewhere in the state, upstate a bit, around the different cities, but
I see,
so much of the Democrats are in here were so long kind of like Wall Street Democrats, cop union Democrats. And so, yes, they voted blue nationally, but it's taken a big coalition of progressive activists and new generations and new people coming in to kind of change the kind of Democrat that they were.
A coalition of 200 groups is remarkable, actually. Just managing the logistics of that is a challenge.
Just remembering their names.
You're right, exactly. The big spreadsheet.
Just remarkable. Yeah.
That's
and
really
so
cool.
it's,
Well, good.
a
Good news.
model, I feel like. Obviously, the rest of the country is not always necessarily as progressive as New York, but show that like activism does work, and
That's right.
supporting good candidates does work.
Just need
But the subtext of but how are you going to pay for it is always like, but our poor rich people.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
I mean, the thing is like the amount of money that so many billionaires based in New York made last year. And so many of them, I think also so many of them left the city, whether temporarily and left New York.
And so much of it's foreign money. It's, so much of the property in New York City is owned by, foreign nationals. Nothing against foreign nationals, but they're, they're vacant properties where they're sitting empty while there's people who are on, there's a homeless problem, but there's also a problem in New York City where there's a ton of penthouses that are vacant.
Honestly, if like 100 millionaires who live, who can work from anywhere move, but most people who are pretty wealthy stay because their businesses and their lives are in New York and they have to pay a little more taxes. That's fine. Let the people who have $100 million move, and we can have some more affordable housing.
I like it.
It's not being taken up by the super wealthy.
I think this all just shows we need more progressives everywhere.
Oh,
that's a good catchphrase.
Yeah.
I'm writing that one down.
I think, you can use that, Jordan. I'm not going to charge you for it.
Sure? I don't want to violate anything.
All right. Well, thanks so much. This is good news. I'm very excited. So.
Yeah, I figure once in a while I don't want to end your week on like a really down.
That is really kind of you. Appreciate it.
This is a surprisingly upbeat episode, just all the way around.
It's true.
We can even do things to fight climate change. It's just like, wow.
All right, I'm going to say Joe Manchin. Oh, no, I brought it down.
Well,
we already talked about him.
we did talk about that.
Okay. We'll have to hear it.
All right, man.
It is the Joe Manchin hour here, where
true.
every week we talk about what Joe Manchin's going to let us do or not.
I don't know. Maybe, honestly, like hypnotism. Do you think that has?
That's exactly what I thought. Where we're ultimately like lobbying is big, but if someone could figure out a way to do somnambulant sleep like in Brave New World, education to Joe Manchin, that would change everything.
I think so.
Honestly,
or Jedi mind tricks would be good as well.
I mean, he's obviously smart enough to like get to where he is, but like he can't be able to overpower the best hypnotists.
Well, it is West Virginia, so in West Virginia. I don't know. I don't know what that means either.
All right. Well, we will talk to you again next week.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Good, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jordan.
They're everywhere, they're everywhere, they're everywhere. They're everywhere, they're everywhere, they're everywhere. They're everywhere, they're everywhere.
Thanks for joining us this week, everybody. Thanks to our guest, Mike Grunwald, and Jordan Zachman. We'll be back again with you again next week with another episode of the GOT MFD Show. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Some people